My name is Logan Sampson, and I'll be giving my speech, The Electoral College, How Our Vote Counts or Doesn't. As the 2016 election showed, the popular vote is not the most important part of the presidential election in the US. That title goes to the Electoral College. The Electoral College is the process that the United States uses to select its president. This system allocates votes to each of the states based on the number of representatives that state has in Congress. Nebraska, for example, has 2 electors from the Senate, like every state, and 3 electors from the House of Representatives. According to Nebraska Revised Statute 32-713, these electors meet in each state on the Monday after the second Wednesday in the December after the election and cast ballots for the candidate that they have decided to vote for. There are many functions of the Electoral College process that are criticized and or controversial in today's political climate. I will first cover the history of the college, then address some of these functions, including the population problem and the issue of faithless electors. The Electoral College, as the method by which the president is elected, originates in the United States Constitution, Article 2, Clauses 2 and 3. These clauses explain the basic rules for how the college works and lay forth the grounds for the representation at 1 elector per member of Congress. The second clause states that no senator or representatives or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. Clause 3 further explains the role of an elector as a person who will place 2 votes for the office of president, at least one of which must go to a person who does not reside in the same state as the elector. Dr. Devin McCarthy, a political science professor at Duke University, explained that when the Electoral College was formed, the general vote was strictly for the electors, who were people that the populace thought were intelligent enough to select the candidate that would perform best in the presidency. At this time, 2 votes were placed by each elector because the candidate with the second most votes would become vice president. Today's electors have 1 vote apiece for president, then vote separately for vice president. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, this practice was put into law shortly after Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, both members of the Democratic-Republican Party of the time, tied in the presidential election, even though many of Burr's voters wished for him to be vice president rather than president. The House of Representatives, led by the opposing Federalist Party, was tasked with the selecting of which of the 2 Democratic-Republican Party candidates to elect as president. And it took 36 ballots for either to win majority. The vote ended in Jefferson's favor. Another change brought to the college was mentioned by Dr. McCarthy. His article on Fair Vote describes the introduction of electors pledging their votes to a particular candidate before the general election, which many politicians of the time strongly disagreed with. James Madison expressed his preference in a letter to George Hay. The district mode was mostly, if not exclusively, in view when the Constitution was framed and adopted, and was exchanged for the general ticket years later. Whether or not the general ticket was intended by the Founding Fathers, the practice gaining popularity has formed the basis for today's Electoral College. Today's college has its own swath of problems, one of which is representation based on population. According to Denise Liu of the Washington Post, people want rid of the college for this very reason. The main issue here is that with each state being guaranteed at least 2 votes from their senators and at least 1 from a House member, states with lower population will have a higher representation per citizen. I gathered some statistics from the US Electoral College archives on archives.gov to give a reference point. The average state, by mean, gets 10.19 electoral votes, but 34 states get less than that and are therefore overrepresented. The average electoral vote in the US is the equivalent of 607,000 individual votes. Californian electoral vote takes 719,000 votes, and in Wyoming, votes are as plentiful as 1 per 193,000 citizens. With a divide this large in representation, the question tends to be whether this is the correct way to allocate the votes, and if it isn't, then what is? A vote more evenly spread to the population of a state more fairly represents California and Texas, but Wyoming, while being represented closer to its population, is of almost no importance to elections in this sense. A president elected with this method might as well be the president of California, Texas, Florida, and New York. Worse than not being represented fairly, though, is not being represented at all, much like a handful of electoral districts in 2016. 10 of the electoral votes of 2016 were cast not for the member they were pledged for, but rather for John Kasich, Ron Paul, Bernie Sanders, Faith Spotted Eagle, and Colin Powell. These faithless electors went back to the practices of the 19th century and picked the candidate they thought was best, rather than the one the voters had selected. While this practice is uncommon, it is allowed, and as the Constitution leaves electors' rights to the states, only 3 of these electors were forced to resign their position and withdraw their vote per their state's laws, leaving 7 rogue votes floating in states that do not normally split their electoral vote. While the Electoral College has had a number of problems, both in its early years and in recent times, it is the system that we currently use for presidential elections, and it is important to understand its history and flaws to better this process or create an improved process in the future.